The Guitar Tone Network. A guitarist's perspective on all things related to guitar tone. With your hosts, Rich Adams and Rich Goyette. Greetings.
And hello. Podcast 10, what have you got to gain?
We have some GTN news.
We're going to take a listen to a few different preamp tubes.
And of course, we'll shoot them out.
Boom, that's right. It's going to be fun.
We'll swap out the V1 tubes in a Class A low wattage amp and see what happens.
And discuss what we're hearing in the postmortem, of course. Talk about the differences, what we think about what we found, and some possible applications.
And as always, we'll have GTN listener feedback.
Let's do it. On with the show.
On with the show. GTN News. We'd like to thank our subscribers and all our new subscribers as we're getting a lot more hits, a lot more downloads, and more subscribers every day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The network grows.
Yes, thank you very much. And we are attempting to ramp up productions, trying a few different approaches, how we present the recordings and the podcasts, our findings. These new approaches will include some more live in-room, single-session type approaches, maybe a panel of listeners and friends whose opinions we value. We might try and do something that's a little bit blind, maybe shoot out a couple of guitars and not tell you which one's which and what the specs are until the end of the podcast.
Right. That postmortem will be revealing the secrets.
Yes, it'll be the postmortem reveal.
Yeah, that could be a new segment. The reveal. Something has come up. When it comes to the things that we shoot out, we don't have any sponsors. We don't have anything going on with local music stores or anything like that. So we might not always be shooting out everything our listeners would like to have shot out.
So one thing worth mentioning is that not all the gear that we use is our own, and that the gear that we actually do use that is ours is pretty much what interests us. And so there's going to be a little bit of a miss there for folks who are not in the same headspace as we are. Nothing to be done for that. We're sorry if we don't pick the cable that you're interested in. We try and loop back around like with the patch cable shootouts and provide more information for different things that we've received feedback on. So hopefully we can get back around to that. But the bottom line is that we don't have sponsors. We're not trying to do anything to endear ourselves to the people who are at the heart of the industry making different things. And so if we find a music store that's willing to work with us, if we have some friends who have gear that they'd like us to try, that's sort of our hope. As you all know out there, if you're a gearhead like we are, gear comes and goes. So things that we used in the initial podcasts, we may not even own anymore. The point of this little speech here is really, hey, we're shooting out what we own currently. We don't own everything. Sometimes things come and go. We're trying to get a larger breadth of gear that we can have access to by talking to people who own music stores and stuff. But in the end, it is what it is. We shoot out what we have access to. So, one of the podcasts we have coming up that we're probably going to try and do here is attenuators. And we have a couple, but we'll use what we have. And if we can find something like a THD hot plate or something like that that's more common, we'll go ahead and utilize that as well. But we can't guarantee that we'll have access to that stuff.
I'll say it if Rich won't. We are the Guitar Tone Network. So if any folks are interested in the New England area who want to be a part of the network and offer up their gear, or if you have a warehouse of gear, if you have a music store, whatever it is, keep in mind we are trying to be completely unbiased.
Well, we don't want to favor any particular product.
Right.
We don't mind giving you mention.
Yeah.
We don't mind thanking you, providing information in the show notes that links people to your business or your deal.
Credit to those in the network is absolutely something that will happen. But we're not going to say, we prefer Gibson over Fender, for instance.
Because to us, it's all relative.
Right on.
The overview.
Da-da-da.
Da-da-da. We take an amp, one guitar, one cable, no effects, 4 different vacuum tubes that go into the V1 slot of the circuit. That's it. In big, bold type, be careful when you're working on your amplifiers.
Yes.
The voltage in there can kill you dead.
That is dead.
That is dead. No more playing guitar. No more pissing off the wife. No nothing. you're dead. So don't mess with your amplifier if you don't know what you're doing.
Don't try this at home, kids.
Even if the power cord is not plugged in, you can still blast yourself across the room and stop your heart.
Yes, absolutely.
So don't do it if you don't know what you're doing.
These babies hold a charge. So
they do hold a charge. All right. So that being said, a little history. There are a myriad of amp circuits out there, including some that don't have preamps or preamp tubes or tubes at all. There's solid state stuff. There's digital stuff. However, for the amps that do have preamps and preamp tubes, the first, or the V1 tube, is the linchpin in the circuit. Changing the V1 tube is a modification that the would-be tone seeker can do easily and quickly and can get all sorts of different results from. According to the industry dogma, it's a simple modification that can create dramatic tonal variation. And in most cases, there's minimal disassembly, the amp will not need to be rebiased, and there will be no soldering of any kind. Just shut the power off, pull the cable, swap the tube, plug it back in, turn it back on.
Very carefully.
Very carefully. Did I say that your amp can kill you?
You covered it, Rich.
Okay, good. All right, so typically the V1 tube is closest to the input. Nothing set in stone, though, so as you're looking at this, bear that in mind. Know your amplifier, all right? As I'm sure you know, out there in podcast land, you tone nuts across the world, distortion occurs at multiple points in the amp. However, the thing that makes the first tube special is that it's the first gain stage, and so it interacts with every stage that comes after. It plays a significant role in what kind of distortion and tone you get. As the V1 tube affects the tone, it cascades through every different component within the amp. The other preamp tubes, the power section, the rectifier, the power output trannies, everything, all the way to the speaker. The speaker distorts when it gets loud. As we talked about in the 101 document, breakup, distortion, gain, whatever in a vacuum tube is caused when the signal pushes the tube so that the tube's maximum voltage is approached, thus compressing the signal and adding more harmonic content and warmth. Even an amp played clean has a little bit of clipping, which gives it that nice warmth that so many of us love. A lower gain V1 tube, for example, a 12AU7, can have a significant effect on how the power section of the amp reacts to the signal. Lower gain preamp tubes can cause the power tubes to work harder. A more high gain tube, like a 12AX7, will pass more compressed breakup to the power section more quickly. Preamp distortion does tend to be more fizzy, where the power section distortion is more quote-unquote natural or dynamic. It is worth mentioning that just because you want a high gain amp, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have all the highest gain tubes in your preamp section. It's a complicated mathematical recipe that many people have struggled with over the years. The Guitar Amp Handbook says that guitar amps, and I quote, "Guitar amps are not rocket science. They are more complicated than that." And it's true. You can take a kit from your favorite kit builder, put it together yourself, and your buddy can do the exact same thing, and you'll get two amps that sound totally different, and you won't know why. But you'll be able to hear the difference. A layperson, maybe not, but you'll be able to hear the difference. There's a lot going on there.
I mean, probably beyond parts. I mean, who knows if you're using a different tin even? I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Or you make a cleaner connection on a part of the amp, or maybe you happen to have a different batch of tubes or a different batch of output transformers or rectifier, whatever, solid state or tube, whatever you got, right? So very important to consider all of that. Now, in the show notes, we have a list of highest to lowest gain tubes, but 12AX7 is the highest, 12AU7 is the lowest, and there's a handful in between.
It's time for the shootout.
I'm ready. All right, so we already sort of talked about what we're going to be doing here. My hands are very animated. You can't see them, but it's the only way I can concentrate. Anyway, I picked a few tubes that I thought were pretty common from the little bit of information that I have. I'm not an amp builder, but what we have is we have two different JJ Electronics tubes, a Mullard. All of those are variations on the 12AX7, And then we have the GE that came with it, and it is a 12AY7, which is sort of a middle gain tube. We're going to be using a Gibson Les Paul. It is 100% stock. It is a 1960s VOS, one of my favorite guitars for that Les Paul thing. We're trying to figure out the best way to expose all this, to really, sort of bring out the preamp section. We want the amp to sound good. It's a beautiful sounding amp. So we're actually going to do this at a fairly low volume because we don't really want the power section to come into play. And we're going to use a fairly balanced EQ'd sort of tone, and we're going to use the bridge pickup, which should be fairly bright and snappy a la Les Paul. And the cable that we're using is a Pete Cordish. It's fairly short, so hopefully the cable doesn't compress the signal much at all, which will be good. We're recording into an SM57 off the Reeves. There'll be pictures in the show notes if you're curious about the mic position and all that.
We're plugged into the high gain input, and the power scale is at 9.5. The drive is at 1 o'clock. The bass is at 1 o'clock. The mid-range is at 10 o'clock. And the treble is at 1 o'clock. And the gain is at 3 o'clock.
And so the first set of samples that we're going to do here are going to be with the tube that came with the amplifier, which is the 12AY7 GE.
And again, we'll have dirty pictures in the show notes.
All right, so let me do some playing. The amp is nice and warm. It's been sitting there cooking for the last 2 hours while we've gotten ready for this, by the way. All right. Oh, and by the way, the power cord, just to tie this into the other podcasts, is the Analysis Plus.
Ace Frehley. All right. So turn that bad boy off. Give it a little rest.
All right. So this one is the JJ, and it is the short plate version. The other JJ is a slight variation on that. This is your typical ECC 83. The other JJ that we haven't tried yet is the ECC 803S. Okay. So as you're looking at these, if you physically looked at the tubes in the pictures, you'd see that one JJ has a longer plate and the other one has a shorter plate. This is the shorter plate.
Rock and roll. Yeah. This is going to sound funny. It always feels funny when we describe these different tone colors and whatnot. But it has a different fizz to it. It's like I don't know if it's a thinner fizz, but then it seems to have more on the bottom end. I don't know. Wow. Do it again. Do it again.
All right, here we go again with the same one.
I'm not sure, but it seems like it's squaring off on the low end more, like it's really compressed on the low end, and the distortion on the high end is different. It's like it seems thinner to my ear. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it sounds bigger to me, and I'm not sure I can really quantify it beyond that. You're sort of standing more in front of the amp,
True.
So, but it seems bigger. It seems bigger on the lows to me.
Yeah.
The high end is still there. I mean, when I'm doing that bend at the end, it's there. It's big. It's got the high end, but it's just got bigger low end sound to it. To me, I think maybe you're right in your description. No?
With the compression. Yeah. Cool. It sounds cool. Well, they both sound cool, but this is...
You know what it feels... playing the two tubes differently, this one feels more, I want to say lively.
Yeah.
Like just from a feel perspective, as I'm playing that silly little lick we came up with, it seems more lively. It's almost sloggier.
Wow, that's a new one.
You know, I don't know how to describe. I mean, I love it. I love both of them, but just in those two tubes alone, I think if you're more of a dynamic kind of player, you would want the first tube.
Right.
If you're more of just a rockin' guy,
right,
and you want that, JCM 800, big thing, that's your tube.
If you are Tony Iommi, that's your tube. I'll play your little heart out.
All right.
So is this the other JJ?
This is the JJ, the long plate JJ, which I described previously. All right.
Hey, that's going to be my new blues name, Long Plate JJ. Or
Long
JJ
plate.
Long Plate.
JJ Long Plate.
Yeah.
I like it, man. All right.
Jumbo glazed donuts, man. That is unbelievable.
That's pretty different.
Overdrive, completely overdriven in comparison, Yeah. Oh my.
So to me, that has the same thing the other JJ had, but it also has that screaming high end.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that's the long plate, and the other one was short plate.
Yeah.
Wow.
But by the way, I'm calling them that because I don't know what I'm talking about. So long plate versus short plate, maybe that's the right way to term it, maybe not.
Well,
but
it's one way to describe it for, podcast purposes.
Let me play it again. So.
Yeah. Like you said, across the board, the highs and the lows, everything's squaring off. And what it's doing on the low end, though, is interesting because sometimes those notes weren't discernible. They were so broken up. I'm like, wow, it's like an avalanche of rocks falling on my head. Wow.
Putting the power back in power chord.
The quality of distortion reminds me of a Cheech and Chong movie.
I'm kind of having fun with that, sorry.
It's fine. It reminds me of the distortion from this Cheech and Chong movie where Cheech Marin was playing guitar, and it was just crazy distorted. And I don't remember which film it was.
My mama talking to me, trying to tell me how to live.
That's the song, and that's what it makes me think of. Man, it's just like, wow, that's distorted. Yeah, that's pretty close. Yeah. My mama talking to me, trying to tell me how to live.
But I don't listen to it because my head is like a sieve.
Okay, nobody wants to hear that. Wow, listen. Folks, this is what it's like behind the scenes. We just gush over what we're hearing and stuff.
Yeah. All right. This is... By the way, this is one of the new approaches we were talking about where we basically do all the comparisons in room live with microphones and discuss it on the fly. So, yeah, you're going to get a different podcast this time around.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Wow, that was something.
So this is the Mullard, the final in the 4. And,
let's give it a go.
I'm kind of nervous.
Nice ending. It's interesting. This one, it breaks up quite a bit, but it not as much as the long plate JJ.
Yeah,
but
I think that one's actually a little bit closer to the AY7, to be honest. It's a really nice sounding tube for my taste, personally anyway.
It sounds really, really sweet. It breaks up in all the right places. It's, yeah. Yeah, I like that. It's not easy for us to just switch the tubes out. So, I kind of wish we could do the back-to-back thing like we normally do, but we'll just have to deal with it.
Yeah, as part of the new approach is we can't really do let's go back and listen to that one real quick again, ladies and germs.
So that we'll see how this goes and see if we start to hate the new approach. But I have to say, what I would love to do is just compare this tube to the initial tube, the first tube, which is
put the amp back the way it was.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. So we can do that. Let's put the amp back the way it was. Let me do a power chord. Putting the power back in power chord here too.
Right. Not as powerful as that long plate JJ, but it definitely is cool.
That tube was insane. All right, back to the original tube, which is the 12AY7GE.
Okay, the 12AY7GE, it's not breaking up as much as that Mullard was.
Which, that falls in line with what we talked about with gain structure and sort of the different gain variations. 12AU7 would break up even less, right? Really. AY7 sort of in the middle of the pack.
And you can see the chart in the show notes.
Let me play it again because that was a little sloppy on my part. So I'll do it again.
Right on. Right.
It's not sustaining as long either. It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think the sustain is happening more with some of the other tubes because it's so much more compressed. With less compression, you're going to get less sustain.
Cool.
All
right. I'm going to do the power and power chord for this one too, just for giggles. Ready? Boy, it really just does not sustain the same. It's really interesting. The other ones are like pulsing big.
Yeah.
Yes.
Post-mortem on this, for me, the tube that's in there now, 12AY7GE, is, I think, the right tube for my taste for the amp. It's the tube I think I would have selected only because it's not slamming the sound up against the wall so much. I like a real dirty sound when I want it, but I also don't want to feel like that's all I can get out of my amp.
Yeah, and we really are just talking about taste. Hopefully, as you listen to this, and you go and extract the high-quality samples and listen to them for yourself, you'll be able to form your own opinion about it. This Reeves is sort of a high-watt Marshall-y kind of thing going on, and the different tubes, that V1 tube does seem to make a pretty interesting difference. And for my part anyway, with these fairly moderate settings that we have on the amplifier, we're not really pegging anything. We're not bringing the power section into play. I would say that you have, with the 12A Y7, more of a plexi kind of thing going on. And when you put in the long plate JJ or the regular JJ, you have more of a Jubilee JCM thing going on. And the Mullard is somewhere in the middle there. We are playing a humbucking guitar. It has Burstbucker 2-in-1 in it, so it's kind of like the vintage-minded sort of PAF type pickup. So it's not really going to do much more than provide a really kind of blooming kind of tone to what's happening in the amp. For my part anyway, I could see wanting to have the JJ short plate in there for certain things. I could see, depending on the guitar, maybe if we're putting a Strat through this amp, that tube would really scream with a single coil, for example. Maybe that's a test for another day.
I think so, because as you were saying that, I was thinking, man, how cool would it have been to also test a Strat? But we simply just don't have the time,
Yeah, we're trying to keep these to a half an hour to be merciful to you all out there in podcast land.
You tell us, folks, do you want to hear this same test with these 4 tubes with a Strat? Because I want to hear it, and we will hear it later, I'm sure. But if you want to hear it, let us know, and we'll make that happen.
All right, excellent. Yeah, and have a listen to the high-quality files. We say it every time. Don't listen to the podcast and think, oh, I can really tell the difference. Listen to those high-quality files on a good sound, nice pair of headphones or whatever. And I just want to mention real quick on the guitar, these are pure nickel 10s, and I was using a Jazz 3 Dunlap pick, a fairly stiff pick, small pick that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So, and the guitar was freshly set up about a week ago. So listener feedback, this is where we take a moment to talk about feedback, put in any corrections, do all that stuff that we do because we're only human and we're just figuring this out as we go, Right on. This time around, we're going to talk about a fellow who sent us an email by the name of Lance. Thank you for listening, Lance. And thank you for the very detailed email that you sent. It was fantastic.
Yeah. Lance made some interesting observations about our True Bypass podcast. He was saying that we weren't very clear when we were describing what we're listening for, I guess.
Yeah. If we weren't clear, we apologize to you guys and to you specifically, Lance. But the upshot of the podcast, what we sort of discovered in doing it is that even if something says it's true bypass, it was still affecting the tone. The Polytune, the TC Electronics Polytune was a really good example of that. It's true bypass. However, it seemed to have more significant effect on the tone than some of the other pedals did that were quote unquote true bypass.
Yeah.
And, certainly the pedals that were not true bypass were sort of as advertised. They sort of grabbed a little bit of the high end and sort of mushed it a little bit. And so that was really kind of what we were going for. We were trying to illustrate that and trying to discover for ourselves, how true bypass is true bypass. Because really you would want it to be, in a perfect world, if it's true bypass, it's like plugging directly into the amplifier. And indeed, that is really not the case, it would seem. The other point that Lance brought up was on the wiring harness podcast with the Les Paul going through the Swart, which we thought was very telling, pretty interesting that it would make such a dramatic difference. One of the things that he mentioned was that, we didn't really have measured specs on all the potentiometers.
Yeah, I mean, we probably could have taken an ohm meter and tested these ourselves, but I think what we were trying to get at is just sort of illustrating what the difference a wiring harness can do.
Yeah, exactly.
And it wasn't so much about the specs. It wasn't so much about the granular details as it was what the possibilities are. And you would have to research that yourself if you were looking to do it.
Yeah, and so, I guess maybe a good way to put it would be that we're not necessarily trying to tell you what the right measurements are on the potentiometers. We're just trying to illustrate, hey, look, here's a company that says we have really high-quality potentiometers that are matched. Put them in your guitar and it'll make a difference. And so we did that, and it did make a difference. We thought we were very detail-oriented until we read Lance's email. Right. It's very impressive, Lance. You did a hell of a job writing that up. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks, Lance. So that's the show. And you can email feedback to gtn@guitartonenetwork.com or tweet using @GTN Podcast.
You can also join the GTN Facebook group or Google Plus pages.
You've been listening to the Guitar Tone Network with Rich Adams
and Rich Goyette.
Show notes and past episodes can be found online at podcast.guitartonenetwork.com.
I think that's it, man. I think we have podcast 10. We're into double digits. Can you believe it? It only took, 3 years?
Is it? Yeah, but you know what? It seems like our listeners are still hanging on, so that's a wonderful thing.
Yep. Hopefully what we're giving you guys is something you enjoy. So, keep listening. Keep looking for that magical tone component. Let us know what you find.
One note from my camp, it was my birthday recently, and I got the bestest gift a wife could ever give a guitar-playing husband, and that is this thing. It looks like a stapler, but it's a punch, so you could take your old credit cards, whatever you want,
nice.
turn them into picks.
I've seen that thing. You got one of those.
Yeah,
nice,
I got one,
dude.
Man. And I was like, scouring my house for whatever I could find, old, credit cards, or
even if they're not expired, you're like, I'm going in. Screw it. Where's your wallet, honey?
Yeah, right. Actually, that's a great idea. This podcast is licensed under Creative Commons 3.0. For more podcast and guitar tone related resources, please go to guitartonenetwork.com. Show notes and past. That's a blooper. Show notes and past episodes.
Dude, I'm not even kidding. Her name is Sauvignon Blanc.